they never get higher than the bottom 3 levels of degree, the overwhelming majority. But in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which pervades much of world politics, particularly in America and other areas, there's another 30 degrees above that, to the 33rd degree, which the vast majority of Freemasons never get near. And there's another 13 levels not officially accepted to exist, which some people call Illuminati degrees, which at that level, the Freemason secret society is in a different universe to the part where the vast majority of Freemasons exist, right down here. Compartmentalization. This is how it works. So every one of these institutions that control the direction of the world and our daily lives is a pyramid. The banking system is a pyramid. You go into the local bank, the person you meet across the counter won't even know what's going on in the bank manager's office behind them, let alone what's going on at board level and higher. I met a guy only last weekend who'd been in the bank. He's retired now, but he worked for a big British bank, and he worked to a very, very high level in it. And he heard me speak, and he came up to me afterwards, and he said, you know, it's right, you know. He said, because I got very, very high in this bank, but there is an echelon above where I got that no one can get unless they are chosen by this elite few. So the banking system is a pyramid going to a peak. The intelligence agency network in the world is a pyramid going to a peak. At that peak, all the major intelligence agencies, British intelligence, Mossad, the CIA, all these around the world, they're the same organization. Not here, but here they are. The multinational company network is a pyramid. So is the global media, and so on. And there is a global pyramid within which all these work, in which the peaks of all these individual pyramids, banking, business, media, etc., fuse into one peak. And up there, it's speculated by many people, there perhaps may be no more than 13 families, 13 people at the peak, pervading down through these different levels the same basic policy, which is pushing the world towards more and more centralization of power. And within this global pyramid are a series of organizations which, from my experience anyway, most journalists will never have heard of. But working together, they form the core of the secret government of the world. And this is operating well above the level of the Clintons and the Majors and the Coles and so on. Indeed, they are manipulating events to make sure that their people get into positions of power. There is this like cozy little myth that is perpetuated between politicians and the media. Politicians walk the world stage as if they are the final arbiters of power in the world. So when a president speaks, the cameras run and it's flashed around the world, prime ministers and such like. The media report the world as if presidents and prime ministers are the final arbiters and decision makers in the world, which means that the people above the level of presidents and prime ministers that really make the decisions, they're never looked at or exposed by the mainstream media because they're not accepted to exist. And yet, who decides who becomes president of the United States or even runs for president? Those who control the money, cuckoo land it is to run for president, and those who control the media. Same people control both. Though they decide not only who runs for the Republicans, they decide who runs for the Democrats as well, and so it is around the world. This group of organizations began to be created after the establishment of a secret society in Britain, because Britain's been a real center for this. A secret society called the Round Table, involving a guy called Cecil Rhodes, after which Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, was named. In 1919, the Versailles Peace Conference, the American members of this round-table secret society, who just happened to be, merely coincidental of course, the main players behind the American government that went in and fought the First World War, met at the Hotel Majestic in Paris with the British members of this secret society, which, yet another coincidence, just happened to be the key members of the British war cabinet in the First World War. And they decided to start to create offshoot organizations which, working together, would constitute the secret government of the world, or a big chunk of it. The first of these organizations was set up in London in 1920, called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, also known as Chatham House. Again, these organizations are pyramids, with most people involved in them not realizing the real agenda. And all these organizations are projected at the world as this term that's emerged over the last 20 years, think tanks, debating organizations. In 1921 came the next in these organizations. The American version of the Royal Institute was known as the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, since 1921, virtually every president of the United States has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Royal Institute of International Affairs works to control British domestic and particularly foreign policy. Don't matter who's in, Labour or Conservative, same people run the show, which is becoming more and more obvious. And the Council on Foreign Relations in America is there to control and manipulate American, particularly foreign policy, but other policies also. After the Second World War, when we had more centralization of power, because we've had 2 wars in this century now, something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? After the First World War, the world was more centralized in terms of power. After the Second World War, it was even more centralized. That was the game, that was the idea, the goal. In 1954 came an organization which today is probably the key organization in this network, called the Bilderberg Group. Bilderberg Group met officially for the first time in 1954 at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Holland, under the chairmanship of a member of the Dutch royal family called Prince Bernhard, who has an interesting CV. He was, according to many published works, a member of the SS before the war, worked for German intelligence during the war, and then became a major shareholder of Shell Oil after the war. The present chairman of the Bilderberg Group is Lord Carrington, former British cabinet minister and foreign secretary when the mistakes were made that led to the Falklands War. He resigned as the result of those mistakes and was given the job as Secretary General of NATO. Nice work if you can get it. Lord Carrington and his buddy Henry Kissinger come up everywhere. They are 2 of the super gophers of this manipulation. They're not top of the pyramid people necessarily, though Kissinger is up there. They are people who go around manipulating into place the policies decided, playing one off against the other and such like. The Bilderberg Group, like all these others I talk about, have among their number the top people, and I mean the top people, in global politics. Not Fred Jones, MP for, Margate East or something. Prime ministerial, presidential, ministerial and leader of the opposition level I'm talking about. The top people in global banking, the top people in the global multinational company network, in the global military. The Secretary General of NATO is always there. Indeed, it's a Bilderberg appointment, that post. The top people in the global media. The Bilderberg Group has a steering committee which meets all the time, monthly, usually in Britain, to discuss policy and keep this program going of centralization of power towards world governance stuff, which incidentally the European Union is a stepping stone towards. And then once a year it meets somewhere in the world in very strict secrecy and has a big conflab with loads and loads of people from around the world coming in. They try very hard even to keep quiet where they're meeting, never mind what they're actually discussing. And I had a series of amazing coincidences when I was writing the book And the Truth Shall Set You Free, for reasons I'll talk about when I come to the spiritual, which put me in the right place at the right time to see things happen or gather information. And one of those things happened in relation to the Bilderberg Group. Last June, I was invited to stay with a schoolteacher friend of mine in Switzerland. The trip had been arranged for about 6 to 9 months. The tickets had been organized. It was all set a long time in advance. About 5 days before I left for Switzerland, I got a letter, a kind of round-robin letter, from a journalist in America who works for an alternative newspaper and has dedicated his life, in effect, to chasing these organizations, particularly the Bilderberg Group, finding out who's involved, what the agenda is, what they're trying to achieve and stuff. And even he, who does it full-time, often only finds out where they're meeting very late in the day. So I get this letter, and it said, I've found where the Bilderbergers are meeting this year. It's in Bergenstock, Switzerland, and it happened to be just down the road from where I was staying at the time I was staying there. Thank you, universe. So I turn up. It's 3 hotels, 3/4 of the way up this mountain at Bergenstock. $1,000 a night suites. I had a bag of sherbet lemons, as I recall. The Park, the Grand, and the Palace. And it's like summing out a James Bond. I expected, you know, the car chase to come past me any minute, that kind of atmosphere. Mercedes everywhere. And why is it, I wonder, that whenever there's Mercedes around, there's people like that, with shoulders like that, and big double-breasted suits like, and whether they've got bad memories, I don't know, but they've got little name tags on them, you know. It was obviously something was going on and being organized. So I enjoy the atmosphere for a while. I think it's very strange, and I leave. And then I come back on the last of the 4 days they met. What a difference. Now I can't get on the mountain leading up to the hotels because the road is blocked by the Swiss police right at the bottom of the mountain. Across the mountain are military lookout posts. According to this journalist, in the early days there were helicopters all over the mountain surveying the place. This is a private meeting of a private organization attended by many, many of the people we see on the news and in the newspapers every week and actually have the opportunity to vote for in this democracy that we're supposed to live in. Incidentally, one of the great myths I feel we need to get over is the fact that democracy is freedom. No, it's not. It's a con trick. 50 people telling 49 what's going to happen in their lives is not freedom. Or in our electoral system in Britain, about 35 telling the rest what's going to happen is certainly not freedom. But freedom and democracy have become interlinked, so one means the other. So we're in a democracy, we are free, so we accept it, when we're actually in a tyranny. Anyway, I thought I'd play the ignorant tourist in Bergenstock, you see, which I did with remarkable aplomb. So I come up to the roadblock light, and this Swiss policeman comes over. I knew he was a Swiss policeman because on his back it said Swiss police. You know, my observation is, my powers of observation are unbelievable that day. This is a nice man I'm talking to here, spoke very good English. And I said to him, look, I said, I came here the other day and I went up there, what's the problem today? It was very obvious he didn't know exactly what was going on, but I remember what he said. He said, it's top secret, no one up there before 5 o'clock. After that, you'll be able to go back to the hotels. Last day it was. 2 things occurred to me. One was the irony that I could have told this guy what was going on up there, and many of the people that were up there, because they're always there, Lord Carrington, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, of the Rockefeller Empire, which is fundamentally involved in all this. Representatives of the House of Rothschild, also fundamentally involved in this, and many of the other key people, like Agnelli, the head of Fiat, and people like that, the big players in the world banking, political, and business network. The other thing that occurred to me is that I was looking into this policeman's eyes, and I was looking at compartmentalization. Because, as I say, this was a nice man. He probably had children and grandchildren. He doesn't want to leave them some global tyranny. But he doesn't know what he's defending. What has he been told? Top secret meeting, no one passed here till you're told. That's all he knows. So although he doesn't want to leave his children, not all of the people up there, because some of them are manipulated too, but what the core of that organization wants to leave his children, he doesn't want to. But he doesn't know what he's defending. So on that one afternoon, he's keeping from the public eye some of the people that wish to leave his children exactly that. We had a situation in Bergenstock where the secrecy was so fierce for a private organization, a think tank, that they brought them in by private plane to a military airfield at the bottom of the mountain, and then flew them behind the security cordon in helicopters. Didn't even drive them up there. And it's amazing how if your attitude turns out to be the right attitude for the people that control that organization, how your career can soar after you're invited to these conflabs. In the 1970s, certainly outside of Britain, a virtually unknown, very little known conservative opposition spokesman called Margaret Thatcher started being invited to some Bilderberg meetings. She goes on to be not only leader of the Conservative Party, but leader of Britain, Prime Minister, right through the 1980s when fundamental changes were happening to British society through something called Thatcherism. Interestingly, on the other side of the Atlantic at the same time, purely by coincidence of course, we had Reaganomics, which just happened to be the same economic policies. Isn't life funny, all these coincidences? It couldn't just be that the same people made sure both were in power at the same time, because that economics was exactly what was required through the 80s as part of this plan for centralization on a global level. In 1991, even in America, a virtually unknown governor for Arkansas called Bill Clinton was invited to the Bilderberg meeting in Baden-Baden, Germany. Within a year, this guy is successfully running for President of the United States. In 1993, another relatively unknown Labour Party Home Affairs spokesman in Britain called Tony Blair was invited to the Bilderberg meeting in Greece, along with his opponent, the Conservative Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke, by the way. Within a year, Tony Blair is leader of the Labour Party and, barring a miracle, will become Prime Minister of this country. It's a great career move. The last 5 Secretary Generals of NATO, and I only know it's the last 5 because that's only as far as I've had time to check back, it's many more than that. The last 5 Secretary Generals of NATO, Bilderberg's group members. Manfred Werner, Joseph Luns, Lord Carrington, Willy Claes. The present one, Javier Solana, Bilderberger. And indeed, when they were discussing who was going to be the new Secretary General of NATO, it was between 3 people. Javier Solana, Bilderberg Group, Uffe Ellemann-Jensen of Denmark, Bilderberg Group, and Ruud Lubbers, the former Dutch Prime Minister, Bilderberg Group. The head of the World Bank and many of his predecessors, James Wolfensohn, the World Bank whose investment policies in what we call the Third World have created human and environmental mayhem for decades, Bilderberg members. And one of the big Bilderberg policies since 1954, indeed before, 54 was when it became official, has been, wait for it, the creation of a European superstate with one central bank, one currency, centralization of political power, and encompassing the former Soviet Union. Who is the biggest voice in Europe today saying we must not fall behind the time scale for the central bank and the currency in Europe. Chancellor Kohl of Germany, long-term Bilderberger, as were many of his predecessors as Chancellor of Germany. Who took us into Europe? Edward Heath, Bilderberger. Who supported him from the Labour side? Harold Wilson, Bilderberger. Roy Jenkins, Bilderberger. Dennis Healey, long-term Bilderberger, was at the first meeting in 1954. Who supported going into Europe and staying in Europe from the liberal, the third party perspective? Joe Grimond, Bilderberger. David Steele, Bilderberger. Paddy Ashdown, Bilderberger. The key posts that control decision making, which pushes further and further towards centralization of power, all or most of which, increasingly all, are peopled by members of these organizations. Now this may be a magnificent coincidence, or it may be that we need to know what's really going on in front of our eyes here. The last of these organizations I'll mention briefly is called the Trilateral Commission. Because of its name, as its name would suggest, it's there to coordinate the same manipulation between three parts of the world: America, Europe, Japan. It was set up in 1972-73 by David Rockefeller, one of the key men behind the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations, and a guy called Brzezinski, university guy, was in the Carter administration. And the Carter administration is very relevant here because the Trilateral Commission is a very good example of how you can manipulate events with all these organizations working as one, because many people are actually members of a number of them at the same time. The goal, the first goal of the Trilateral Commission in 72-73 was to put one of its members in the White House as President of the United States as soon as possible. It managed it at the next election when Jimmy Carter became President of the United States. The Carter administration was like a who's who sports and social club annual outing of the Trilateral Commission, an organization that had been going for about 3 or 4 years at the time. Walter Mondale, Vice President, Trilateral Commission. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, Trilateral Commission. National Security Advisor, a key post in America, this guy Brzezinski, who actually helped to set up the Trilateral Commission. And from there downwards, the Carter administration was awash with members of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, because we have choice, because we live in the land of the free, people then replaced the Democratic Carter administration with the Republican Reagan-Bush administrations, which were also awash with members of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. And then the Republicans were replaced by the Democrats because we have free elections. And Clinton Democratic administration is awash with members of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. I'll tell you what it's like. In the high streets of Britain, there are 2 electrical retailers called Currys and their opponents, Dixons. So some people go into Dixons and they say, I had a bad time at Dixons, you know, I don't like them. I'm going to go to Currys and give them my money, I am. They're owned by the same people. The 2 major roadside restaurants in Britain, Happy Eaters and Little Chefs, owned by the same people. The competition is actually an illusion. Different name above the shop front, same people with their hands on the wheel. That's what happens in global politics. Why, you might understandably ask, aren't we told about this by the global media? Why aren't we told about these meetings which the alternative media can find out about with difficulty, but they can? and the common themes between people who are in the major positions in the world. How people from apparently different sides in politics who argue in public are actually attending the same meetings of organizations with a proven agenda of world government, world central bank, world army, world currency, microchip population. I offer this as a possibility. Maybe, just maybe, we don't hear about the Bilderberg Group and its attendees in Telegraph newspapers in Britain, because Telegraph newspapers are owned by something called the Hollinger Group, which is owned by a man called Conrad Black, steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. Incidentally, two of the people on his board of directors are Henry Kissinger and Lord Carrington. Maybe we don't hear about any of these organizations and their agenda in Rupert Murdoch's News International in Britain, which owns a stream of newspapers and Sky Television, very much involved with, of course, because the former executive chairman of News International and still a board member is a guy called Andrew Knight, core steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. Maybe in America they don't hear about any of these organizations in one of their most influential newspapers, the Washington Post, because the Washington Post and a great long stream of other organizations and publications are actually owned by Katharine Graham, who's owned the Washington Post going back to Watergate and beyond, where they were very much involved, of course, in removing Nixon, because Katharine Graham is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission. Key members within the hierarchy of the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and a stream of other major publications all around the world are controlled or owned by members of these organizations. None of them ever mentioned them. Isn't that funny? So what we're looking at here are organizations within organizations. So while apparently people in the banking system here appear to be isolated from the political system here and the media here, actually there is one central organization which actually manipulates and coordinates a policy among all these apparently unconnected institutions of the world. Which kind of brings us back to Bosnia. I believe passionately that Bosnia is a horrific case of problem-reaction-solution, bringing into being, or very much closer, the establishment, the precedent established of a world army. Interesting, therefore, to look at the major peace negotiators in Bosnia appointed since that horrific conflict began. The first European Union peace negotiator appointed was Lord Carrington, President of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chairman of the Bilderberg Group, member of the Trilateral Commission. He was replaced as European Union peace negotiator by Lord David Owen, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, who was replaced by Carl Bildt, former Swedish Prime Minister, Bilderberg Group. At the same time that they were working on behalf of the European Union in Bosnia, the United Nations peace negotiators, who were working with them, very close with them all the time, were Cyrus Vance, Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, and he was replaced by a Norwegian, Thorvald Stoltenberg, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission. When they failed to achieve peace, out of the blue, amid worldwide publicity, came an independent peace negotiator, Jimmy Carter, first Trilateral Commission President of the United States, Council on Foreign Relations member. Then came the group of people who negotiated the so-called Dayton Agreement, which led to the World Army situation. These were Bill Clinton's peace envoy, Richard Holbrooke, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. He answered to the Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, who answered to Bill Clinton, Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission. The World Army in Bosnia is now commanded by Admiral Leighton Smith, Council on Foreign Relations, and the civilian part of its operation is headed by Carl Bildt, Bilderberg Group. We are looking at a gigantic contrick before our eyes. We don't live in a democracy in this country or in America and these other places. We live in a one-party state where the same force from the peak of the pyramid string pulls all sides. A few years ago, they had a democratic election in America, and what appeared to happen was that George Bush, Republican, was replaced by Bill Clinton, Democrat. But what actually happened? George Bush, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, 33rd degree Freemason, funded by the Rockefellers, was replaced by Bill Clinton, Democrat, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, 33rd degree Freemason, funded by the Rockefellers. We're free, honey. Play the national anthem. One-party state. Different names above the shop fronts, same people control whatever. Which is why, as we all say all the time, it doesn't matter who you gets in, they still do the same. Of course they do. Because the same people are string pulling the whole show.